Hi, it's Pete Cohen and welcome to episode 161 of the Mi365 podcast series. Today's podcast is called The Truth About Vulnerability. So this is a podcast you really want to listen to because vulnerability is something that I think so many of us all around the world are scared. Scared to reveal what's really going on, scared to reveal how we're really thinking and feeling. Learning to embrace vulnerability and use it is really something that can change the way we live our lives so we can be who we're truly capable of being. So I would encourage you for this podcast to get yourself a cup of tea or coffee, sit down and let's have a chat about this incredibly important subject. Hi and welcome to episode 161 of the Mi365 podcast series, The Truth About Vulnerability. In this podcast today, I really want to unpack some of the stigma I think that is attached to this word. But before we get stuck in, I want to start off by saying one thing to all of you that are listening to this or watching this, wherever you are in the world. And it's this: I love you. I love you. Now you might be thinking, what? Why did you say that? You don't even know me. Or maybe I do know you, and me saying I love you, I don't know how that makes you feel. I became so interested in the whole subject of vulnerability really when I was working as a sports psychologist, because I would work with teams of people and it became, I'll never forget, I was so excited about working with a professional cricket team because not only did I love cricket, but I always wanted to be a cricketer at the highest level. But I think I probably had the talent, but I definitely lacked the confidence, definitely lacked the courage to really reveal what I was thinking and feeling, because what I was thinking and feeling was really affecting my performance. And when I worked with these top sports people, I was so excited. I never forget turning up on the first day to go and work with this team. And the coach just said, look, just come and watch. We're playing a competitive game. And I couldn't believe immediately just the atmosphere in the changing room of these players. It was an atmosphere that I'd seen before, but I probably had never questioned it in the way that I was questioning it there, which was this kind of macho culture that was there about people who didn't seem to feel comfortable letting their guard down. People actually not revealing how they were thinking and feeling, and eventually some of them did, but only a few. Because it became very apparent to me that I was only there to help people get better. And I believe that the path to getting better often means being open to what's going on inside you. And the word vulnerable, if you Google it, it's fascinating. Its origin, it kind of means to be wounded, to be hurt. I wrote down some of that stuff here this morning. To be injured. So we can understand why people might feel uncomfortable feeling vulnerable, because they're frightened to be hurt. I don't know how many of you, maybe a penny has dropped, that we're almost nervous to reveal what is going on inside us. But to be vulnerable is to be human. Let me say that again. To be vulnerable is to be human. To be your true self is to allow yourself to think and feel whatever it is that you want. But most of us have been brought up to fit into a world that kind of says, no, don't be like that. Stiff up a lip. Come on, just pull your socks up. Get on with it. And look, I'm so lucky, so privileged to have had incredible parents. And my mum, she's someone who has taught me so much and went massively out of her way to help, because she could see I was vulnerable as a child. We're all vulnerable, right? We're vulnerable of falling over and actually getting hurt, vulnerable of being rejected But for me personally, maybe like you, at school, I really struggled to fit in, and I struggled to read. I remember in a classroom where everyone was going around, one person would read after another. I'd be so nervous, I would actually start stuttering because I found it hard to read the way that everybody else did. Well, in fact, I didn't really know how everyone else was reading. All I knew how I was reading, and it made me feel really, really uncomfortable. I was absolutely convinced from a very early age there was something wrong with me. And no one really ever asked me, how do you feel? And even if they'd asked me how I felt, I'm not sure I would have been able to have expressed myself. But looking back, I felt alone. I felt almost backed into a corner. I felt hurt. I felt vulnerable. And I think many of us have experienced this in our life, but we don't use the vulnerability to be courageous. Because this is the really fascinating thing to me. To be vulnerable is to be open, to open up your heart. And this is something that I think many of us struggle to do, to say something like, you know what, hey, you know, I love you. You know, my dad, bless his soul, who's, you know, not on this earth anymore, I think he had a pretty interesting relationship with his parents. I don't think his parents ever said to him, hey, son, I love you. And I reckon, I don't know, in fact, my dad did tell me that, but I reckon my dad struggled at the beginning to tell his kids that he loved you, that he loved us. And he really, really did. You used to say, I love you, I'm so proud of you. He became vulnerable. To be vulnerable is to be open with you, to express ourselves. And to be able to express ourselves fully is, I think, what makes life so sweet. And one of the main points I want to make to you here is to be open as much as you can, and realize that if you're going to be open, you're going to get hurt. It's going to happen. But what we all have this opportunity in life to do is to use what is... let me give you an example. And I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to say it now. So I'm a speaker. I've been speaking all over the world for many corporates, and a couple of talks I've done recently haven't gone down particularly well. And there's always a reason, and when I get the feedback from people, sometimes I take that a bit personally, because I feel vulnerable that they're giving me feedback, they're giving me criticism, and it's like, I don't know what to do with this. But I've learned through experience is to, okay, it's hard right at the first few moments, then to be open. I'm going to be open here. I'm going to listen to what is being said, and I'm going to look to learn and grow, because that's what I want to do. We are here to learn and grow. And if you want to learn and grow, you have to be vulnerable, because you just can't be closed. Anything out there that grows right now, as winter is here, things are still growing, but it's challenging for things to grow because it's having to fight against forces that go against it. And we often go against our nature to grow. You are here to grow. You are here to get better. That's what every cell in your body wants to do. It wants to grow. It wants to express itself. So this feedback came, and I know I was speaking a bit fast. I know that I wasn't using all of my slides, and I'm sure some people didn't like that. But I also know that sometimes where I talk about things like vulnerability, and I talk about what is going on behind the scenes, what is going on inside you, because we know the quality of our life comes down to how we think, how we feel, what we say to ourselves. And some people don't want to go there. And I suppose the more work I do and the more people I help and the more great results we get with people, I start to realize it's much clearer as to what people need to do. They need to look at themselves. They need to open up. They need to see what's going on, see the relationship they have with themselves. And I know that a lot of people just don't want to go there. In fact, I also know when I present, sometimes I'm saying things that people maybe have never even heard, never even thought, to make them think about who they really are, who they want to be, and how they're not where they want to be. And if they want to make changes, they might just have to get uncomfortable. They might just have to get out of bed a bit earlier. They might just have to acknowledge that they're drinking too much alcohol, or deep down inside they're not being the father or the mother that they can be. To be human is to be vulnerable, to feel emotion, to be hurt. But I've always loved this expression. What hurts instructs. And I believe that one of the reasons I'm effective at what I do and I get results with people is I help people see their vulnerability, see themselves in a different light. We know that human beings do not change when we tell them what to do. Not a real change that is theirs. People change when their perspective changes. And all I'm doing in this podcast today is maybe giving you a different perspective of vulnerability. And the next time that you have to go through that's something that is difficult, or you have to have a challenging conversation with someone, just notice that feeling of vulnerability. But it's having the courage to move through something that is difficult. And that's what makes human beings incredible. I've seen it with so many people having to face adversity, having to face something which they wouldn't have chosen. But it's what has been dealt to them. And finding the heart. The word courage comes from the heart. Having the heart to move forwards. I actually wrote down this morning about times where people would put themselves in a vulnerable situation. Every time I get up in front of an audience, I know that the people are giving me the most valuable thing that they have. They're giving me their time. They're giving me, that's the most valuable thing. And to be able to connect with people with their time is something that I take really personally. And I want to give them, just like in this podcast, I want to give you the best of Pete Cohn. I want you to be able to go, you know what, that's great. I've never thought of it like that. You know, and I did feel vulnerable where I had to talk about, I don't know, race with a group of people. I did feel vulnerable where I had a miscarriage, or I did feel vulnerable when I told my children that I love them. And the reason for this, in many cases, is we are worried, we are frightened of being rejected. And rejection hurts, and this is really important. When we lived in caves and we lived in groups of people in the wilderness, the one emotion that you did not want to feel is rejection. Why? Because if you felt that emotion, it was a sign that you might get kicked out of the group that you were in. And if you got kicked out of that group, chances are you would. You'd die, because we would not survive on our own. Why am I telling you this? To acknowledge the fact that you feel vulnerable and you're worried that you're going to get rejected. And then finding the courage within yourself to move through this. This is what the world needs more than ever. Courageous people who will show us the way to move through our vulnerability, to be our very best. It's good to talk, it's good to listen. And one of the reasons why relationships struggle so much, especially between men and women, is men are even more concerned about being vulnerable, because it's like, well, they're supposed to be, a generalization, the provider. They're supposed to be the protector, the strong person. And then with a woman who maybe is feeling vulnerable, is frightened to talk to her husband about it, because she knows when she does, she's frightened that she's going to be rejected. She's also frightened that her husband just isn't going to listen. We have this incredible power to change the world. And just like my dad, who learned to say, you know what, son, I love you. And as I love you for listening to this, to having the courage, to having the vulnerability, even to be open to this, I really appreciate it. And I would love to know, what's your number one takeaway from what I've just said to you here today? You know, we've produced this is the 161st podcast, I want to say to my colleague Casey, who's produced all of these. Casey, man, I love you. To love is to be human. To love is to say, I care about you. And if you choose a life of love, chances are you might get hurt from time to time. I really appreciate you guys listening. Feel free, if you're listening to this on iTunes, we are still in the top 10 for news and noteworthy. And we are for one reason. People like you leaving us comments. If you're listening to this somewhere else on our website, feel free to share it. Feel free to get that message out there. Let's change the world one person at a time. I wish you a happy, happy, beautiful day.